Hello everyone. I know you've been following along through all my prior videos, and I just want to tell you thank you, because at this point, we've really created a great foundation for where I'm going to take you next. Now, I did tell you that I was going to talk about Adam and Eve and give you more understanding on how the hemispheres of your brain are Adam and Eve. And so, before I get there, I wanted to mention and recap a little bit of where we've come and why it's so important. So we talked about how you're made in the likeness of God. We talked about how you're a branch of the one true vine. Jesus is the right hand, God is the left hand. And so we start to understand how ourselves are made in the likeness of God. Three forms of consciousness working as one. And now as we begin to venture more into understanding some of these concepts, we can now tie everything that Jesus is talking about in the New Testament back to what's being discussed in the Old Testament. And so things will start to have a bit more revelation. My whole goal in all of this is to help give people keys to understanding what's happening. And so today, I'm going to talk to you about Adam and Eve and a little bit more. And so I hope this brings some clarity to you and helps you understand a very complex story and helps you take a look at things a little bit different and deeper than maybe you might have understood before. And so what we know is that the Lord brought the wild animals and the birds of the sky to Adam. Adam had two sides. He has his left side and he has his right side. And God brought the wild animals and the birds of the sky, as I mentioned. And so what he did is he brought them to Adam, and Adam gave them all names. And so what's interesting about the nature of the left hemisphere is that it can label emotions. So these wild animals, these birds of the sky, these constructed emotions that are created by the body were given to Adam, and he could name them because the left hemisphere, again, can label emotions. However, it cannot understand the lived meaning or the significance of the emotions. So, he did not have a partner equal to him to be able to handle all of this process, the emotions, to be able to give him meaning. Just like I told you before, when you're in disconnection, when you're in disintegration, separated from your right, you can't feel your body. You don't know really how you feel. You know that you're angry, but you can't feel it. You know that you're hurting, but you have not reconciled it back to you. You haven't given it reconciliation. So there's disintegration. So what God did to the man had two sides, the left and the right. So God put the man to sleep, right? And while he was sleeping, he took one of his sides and then he sealed that part. And then he took this right side and he built the woman. And then he took that woman and he brought her to the man. So if you take a look at Hebrew, you take a look at Torah, there's nothing that connects it to rib. So this has sort of been a very perplexing and difficult thing to understand because of the nature of translation. But there's nothing in Hebrew and Torah that connects it to rib. And so it means sides. So he took the man. The man had two sides, but he took one side from the man, again, built the woman, and brought her to the man. Now Adam not only could label the emotions, but he could have meaning. He could understand. And so this is why she is called the mother of the living. So all the emotions, all the things that are being generated through the body, she's the mother of all of these things. And so we'll begin to talk about this a little bit more. But as you know, in this story, it says, hence, why a man leaves his parents and cleaves to his wife, and they also become one mind, one body. They become one. So you know what's real interesting is that in neuroscience, well, there is in patients with epilepsy, they sever the corpus callosum, which is the little bridge, like I told you before, that connects the two hemispheres. But you know what's interesting is that when they separate it, completely separate the connection between the two, they never, the person never knows that has happened except for bodily function. But they really don't notice that they're not anybody different. They're still the same person, even though there's no connection. So it's real interesting that those things are happening because they are one. And so you see this daily throughout your own life. You know, if your wife is across the world and she can't sleep, or maybe something really devastating happened, or hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it does, you get this gut punch, you get this feeling come across you. And you ever wonder why that happens? Because just like even if you separate the hemispheres of a brain and the epileptic patient doesn't realize that they're not separated. They're still together. The same thing happens between a man and a woman. Even though they're separated, they have the same thoughts. You know, your wife calls you on her way back from work, and you were both thinking about the same type of food you wanted to eat, or you both had the same craving, or whatever it is, right? Because there are things happening that people are not understanding, because God blends the spirits of a man and a woman. And so you become one mind. Hence, this is why a man and a woman come together. Now, you know what's also interesting is that, most people will say, oh, he completes me, or she completes me, or they're my better half. Without even thinking about it, they're already articulating the story. And so what naturally typically happens is, there's a nature to the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is typically, again, linear thinking, very strategic, very much able to accomplish one task with clear focus and get things executed, very rational. But the right is self-awareness. So very much in touch with the emotional connection, understanding things on multiple levels, so multidimensional. This is more binary, right? Ones and zeros, and this is multidimensional. So the woman is more multidimensional, able to perceive and sense things maybe below the surface, looking at things through multiple perspectives. So a lot of times, men and women find themselves in relationships where you have this dynamic. So most people are pursuing integration. They want integration. And what happens is people typically find someone who balances themselves out. Maybe a lot of times, I'm not saying this is all the time, but there's the man or the person in the relationship who is very strategic thinking, very single focused, very much task oriented and driven, gets things accomplished with high excellence, with speed, very rational. And then you have someone else in the relationship that tends to be more emotional, but very wise, right? Someone that looks at things through so many different perspectives. And what happens is this is self-awareness. So the The left hemisphere is always projecting, thinking to the future, creating multiple predictions on what could happen, what's the best scenario, what's the best way to go and do and to accomplish a goal. But the right hemisphere is present, self-awareness. So usually if you're this person that's always thinking about the future, always trying to predict and place yourself in the best position, the right hemisphere is the one that typically slows you down. So your wife is typically slowing you down. She's also calming the wrath, so a man will go to correct a child's behavior very quickly instead of trying to dig deep into the underlying causes, the underlying traumas that have caused this outburst by your child. And so the wife comes and calms the man down, because the man is goal-oriented. He's going to, he's binary. You did this wrong, this is what you get. But the right hemisphere, your right hand, is looking at things through so many different perspectives, is present, gives you self-awareness, gives you meaning, and tries to dig into the deeper things, why things are really happening, so that it calms your wrath, gives you new meaning to what's going on. And so you will find yourself typically in relationships where you have this integration, where you have this balance. And so, but the goal, I think, for all of us is, as I said, is the Spirit of God gives you complete balance. A person will have integration. And the way that you come in integration, the way that you become reconnected to your body, you come back into integration, is through gratitude, love, kindness, goodness. These things bring a person into balance, which is why the Spirit of God, which is love, brings people back into balance. Again, brings them back into full integration. And so I think while we do try to pursue, while we are typically drawn to other people who maybe give us better balance, it's important for us to note that it's best if we have a close relationship with God and we ourselves come into balance through His Spirit, so that when two people come together, they're perfectly balanced and there's not these frictions and these things that are going on. So it's important that God is the leader of our lives, and He is the one who is giving us direction, communicating at our right hand, in our hearts, so that love truly can not only flow from you into your wife, but also into your children effectively, and give you peace and calm and self-control. So that's why a man and a woman come together and they also become one, because that's how God created us, so that we are balanced. Now, so I did want to talk about a little bit more here. So now that you know the nature of the left hand and the right hand, you could see why Jesus came to finish his work, came to finish the work that the Father gave him, which ultimately was to reconcile back his children, bring his creation back to himself. But the only way to do that is to take on trauma and release it. Because the emotional, just like your right hemisphere is the mother of the living, we are a part of the one true vine. Just as Jesus says, He says, on that day when you return, you will realize that I am in you and you are in me. So we're connected very closely to the Lord. He is the Good Shepherd. Just like your right hemisphere, right? Just like your wife is very close to your children. And so now when Jesus, if you recall, He looks up to heaven and He says, glorify me, right? And so He's saying, bring me back into reconciliation with the Father, to rise back up to the right hand. And so, but, just as a patient who's going through therapy, when they're taking on these emotions, it's very difficult for them. It's a difficult process. It takes time. And so Jesus looked at the Father, looked up and said, why do you turn your face from me? Because the pain was intense. But this is the process that not only that we go through when we come together, when we take on trauma and release it and have reconciliation with the body, and we know we are the body, the same thing that God was going through. That's how much he loved his people. That's how much he cared for us, that he would pay all of the debts to clear the scales so that we could be reconciled back to God and his spirit could dwell in us forever, because that's the way, unless a person is purified because they must be holy because I'm holy, then, and those debts are paid, the Spirit of God cannot rest in a man forever. So that's also the reason why the priests in the Old Testament before the new covenant had to go and sacrifice, had to go and do these things to clear the sins, the disobedience of the people of God, so that God could rest with them in the midst of the camp. So anyhow, so now you know the nature of the left hand, the right hand. I know it's like so much trying to build into the story, a lot of understanding behind Adam and Eve, but this is what it is. So Adam and Eve, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, just as a man and a woman, are also replicative of the same dynamics. So maybe that helps some of you as well. But there's a lot to talk about. So today I had to bring some notes. All right, now we know that Eve is the mother of the living. And so she is responsible for all the emotions, everything coming up through the body. So the body is holding many things, right? It's holding the Spirit of God, or it can hold other things, other spirits. Now, some people may not believe, some people do believe, but I'm just here to tell you that you can hold other things that are not good. Some of you might notice that all of a sudden maybe you have this uncomfortable feeling about certain things, or something agitates you, or you just have these sudden outbursts, or you have these behavioral things that happen to you. I can tell you right now that there are other things going on, but that isn't for us to get into today. But what I would just tell you is that this is a house for spirits, and the things that you do, the things that you prescribe to or choose to do will essentially cause you to give a legal opportunity for things to affect you in ways that you don't want them to. And so what I did want to talk about is, the reason I say behavior, the reason I say outbursts or things that agitate you, or just different things that are enveloping inside of you is I'm in the alcohol industry. And so I know everyone's probably thinking, man, this guy's in the alcohol industry, but God uses unconventional things. So, but anyway, if you take a look at the spirits industry, why do they call it spirits? They call it spirits because, just as I told you before, right, in the hand model, you have the cortex that sits over this limbic system that's taking everything from the body, and so there are things housed in the body. But when you drink excessively, not responsibly, all of this prefrontal cortex gate opens and everything from the body comes out. Everything that's housed in the body is visible for everyone to see. So it's very important to be responsible. But, I always like to tell this story as, if there's a whole bunch of cattle and behind those gates and you drink enough, you're going to open the latch to that corral, and all these cattle is going to come out and just start stampeding through the fields and crush your life, because everything that's housed inside the body just pours out. And so you'll be able to see a lot of times the spirits, that's why they call it spirits, right? I mean, there could be joyful spirits that, they could, the Spirit of God obviously is love. So you'll see somebody probably behaving a little more on the better side of things. But if there's real trauma, if there's other things that are not good, you will see those things pour out of a person, because spirits reveal themselves through emotions. Okay, so again, Eve is the mother of the living, and the spirits inside of a body that are housed in a body reveal themselves through emotions. And eventually, they're speaking through the mouth and off the tongue. So you will hear a person, what is inside, everything coming out when the gate is unlocked. At the close of the story of Adam and Eve, it says that Adam knew his wife Eve and gave birth to Cain. So the New Testament gives us a translation for this when it says, when desire, again, desire taking from the fruit of what the body is producing, the good and the bad, having a bad inclination, and taking from what you know is wrong and doing it, again, when that desire conceives, it gives birth to sin. And then when sin is at its peak or fully grown, it brings forth death, which is Cain and Abel. Now, as you know, Jesus says that anybody who hates his brother is a murderer, and there's no eternal life in him. Now, I'm going to help bring a little bit more visibility to folks that I think you already intuitively know, but we'll make it clear here. So, as you recall, Cain was cast from the presence of the Lord, and he was given a mark, and he was sent to wander the earth. And so he wandered the earth forever, and nobody would kill him, right? And so if you notice that what Jesus says, that when an unclean spirit leaves a body, it goes to dry places, finding no rest. So, and then there are other scriptures in the Bible that says how a wicked person has no rest. They will find no rest. So you'll notice that people who have hate, anger, and these deep-seated just things internally that are so ugly and full of darkness, that those people are held to the ground. They're held to the earth, to wander the earth and finding no rest, which is why, some people see haunted houses, or, you find these places where there's probably a lot of death, or there was something that was very ugly that happened, and you have these angry, unrested, evil, unclean spirits tethered to those areas, because it has an emotional attachment to that place. And those people are full of unrest because they are angry and full of hate. And so there is no eternal life for them. They are bound in anger and hate and all these things. They're tied to the ground. They're tied to the earth. And they're wandering through the earth. So, you see it visibly in front of your eyes. You know that you hear things moving, and there are things that have happened probably if you've had any sort of experience. And it's because there are spirits that, when they're full of hate, full of anger, they are attached to certain places, or they're to the earth. They're wandering without rest. So this is what that means. So don't go in the way of Cain, to wander the earth until an appointed time, which the Bible says when God, that on that day, the final day, when God reconciles everything and issues judgment on everything. This is why in the Bible, the man that was filled with legion, so all of these evil, all of these unclean spirits, when they all gathered in him, this is why they said, have you come before the appointed time? And because it's not, there is an appointed time for all those things to be given judgment, but they are wandering the earth restless without rest until that appointed time. And this is, again, being given clear understanding by some of these things in the Bible, especially when Legion, the one man who was filled with all of these unclean spirits, this is being revealed in that moment. And so I will not go any further into some of these things, but this is when we start to get into Cain and Abel. So why was Abel killed by Cain? Because just as the Bible says, Abel's works were righteous and Cain's are in right standing with God, doing the right thing, and Cain's were not. Cain was a tiller of the soil, so he was very proud, always focused on his own accomplishments, and never gave God his first fruits or never put God first. And so, but Abel was a shepherd, so he took care of people. He loved people, and he gave God his first fruits, the best of what he had. God was placed as number one priority. And so, if you are teaching your children anything, especially what I teach my kids is that God is above everything, everyone. There is no one that's above God that is more important to me in my life than God. God is number one. But from that place, I'm able to take care of my family, and God takes care of my family. Because if people who do wrong can still give good gifts to their children, how much more would God not give to the people who are his children, right? And so those people who follow him, those people who follow his ways. So for me, I place God priority number one in my life, but that causes my children to also reap the benefits and be a part of this as well. So anyway, my recommendation is for all of you to place God first in your lives. And Jesus is very clear about this. You know, if you place your mother, your father, if anyone who loves them more than me, they're not worthy of me. So you got to place God number one in your life, above everything. So anyhow, man, I appreciate everyone staying up with this story, keeping up and listening to these videos. I know it's been a long journey, but hopefully you guys have gathered some additional insight, and I pique your thought process and to some other things that maybe you were kind of on the fence about, didn't understand, but hopefully all that was made a little bit more clear on this piece. So thank you so much, and till next time.